When was the last time you felt overwhelmed by a constant connection? You know, that moment when you realize the endless notifications, opinions, and expectations were just drowning out your own inner voice. This modern dilemma that our perpetual availability often becomes our greatest barrier to depth and authenticity represents one of the most challenging spiritual paradoxes that we face, because we've been conditioned to believe that success requires constant visibility, immediate responsiveness, and perpetual engagement, even when this approach repeatedly leads to creative depletion, spiritual disconnection, and authentic exhaustion. Frank Ocean represents one of culture's most powerful examples of transcending this pattern, evolving from the hyper-connected expectations of music industry success to the wisdom of strategic solitude and intentional withdrawal. From his deliberate retreat after Channel Orange to his selective approach to visibility and creative release, he embodies what spiritual traditions call conscious withdrawal, the capacity to step back from external noise, to cultivate internal clarity, authentic expression, and renewed power. So if you think about your own relationship with solitude for a moment, how often would you say your attempts to maintain constant connection created more anxiety than fulfillment? What areas of your life would you say that you've been sacrificing depth or breadth, choosing constant visibility over meaningful impact? And what might change if you shifted from perpetual availability to strategic solitude? As we explore Frank's journey today, I'm going to uncover 3 profound spiritual truths about the power of intentional solitude, the wisdom of strategic withdrawal, and the authentic impact that becomes possible only when we release our attachment to constant visibility. And these principles reveal how our relationship with solitude, when approached with conscious intention rather than fear-based avoidance, becomes pathway to understanding the deeper spiritual freedom available beyond the illusion of perpetual connection. Insights that might illuminate your own struggle between external validation and internal alignment. The connection paradox. So when visibility becomes spiritual limitation, our attempts to maintain constant connection often emerge from legitimate desires for recognition, but eventually become the very barrier that limits our spiritual and creative evolution. Frank Ocean's early career trajectory demonstrates what spiritual traditions call the visibility imperative. So the way constant connection becomes expected pathway to success in our hyper-connected culture. His initial rise through Odd Future, work as a songwriter for major artists, and breakthrough with Channel Orange followed the conventional music industry path of increasing visibility, media engagement, and public presence. In his interviews during this period, Frank noted that the industry expectation that you have to be on all the time, and this reality, this pressure towards perpetual visibility, reveals the spiritual principle that connection strategies often begin as pathways to recognition before eventually becoming limitations to authentic expression. So if you consider for a moment your own life with constant connection, when constant connection served as pathway to recognition, perhaps you developed habits of immediate responsiveness in professional environments, maybe maintain constant social media presence for career achievements, or prioritized external validation over internal clarity. Did you notice how these connection mechanisms, while initially advancing recognition, eventually became constraints on your authentic expression? What might these patterns reveal about the deeper spiritual journey from external validation to internal alignment? And what makes this pattern spiritually significant is how it illuminates the evolution from necessary connection to spiritual limitation. Frank's deliberate retreat from public visibility after Channel Orange reveals what wisdom traditions call the withdrawal necessity, which is the recognition that the very strategies that advance our recognition in one phase of life often becomes the barriers to our evolution in the next. So if you think about your own relationship with connection, what visibility mechanisms did you develop for legitimate connection or recognition, I should say? How might these same strategies now be limiting your depth, authenticity, or creative expression? And what freedom might become available if you recognize these patterns as just outdated advancement mechanisms rather than necessary aspects of your success? The psychology of attention confirms this wisdom to be true. Even research shows that connection strategies developed in recognition-seeking environments create neural pathways that fragment attention and diminish creative depth. So when we recognize these patterns, we create what psychologists call attention restoration, which is the capacity to redirect focus from external validation to internal clarity. Frank's evolution beyond the constant visibility mindset reveals a spiritual truth that might transform your approach to life. Our attempts to maintain perpetual connection often brings as necessary pathways to recognition, but eventually become the very limitations we must transcend for spiritual growth. As spiritual teacher Thomas Merton noted, the rush and pressure of modern life are a form of perhaps the most common form of contemporary violence. What evolution might become possible if you compassionately recognize your connection patterns as outdated advancement strategies rather than essential elements of your success. The withdrawal wisdom, so when stepping back creates greater impact. Authentic power emerges not from constant visibility, but from strategic withdrawal and the depth of expression that becomes possible through intentional solitude. Frank Ocean's approach to visibility and creative expression, it demonstrates powerful evidence of what happens when we shift from constant connection to intentional solitude. His 4-year retreat after Channel Orange, selective social media presence, and independent release of Blonde reveals what spiritual traditions call strategic withdrawal, which is the understanding that our impact expands when we prioritize depth over frequency, quality over quantity. So if you consider his revolutionary approach to Blonde, creating the album in deliberate seclusion rather than the typical collaborative studio environment with constant industry feedback, rather than maintaining visibility through regular releases and features, he withdrew to create work of unprecedented depth and authenticity. So this approach, focusing on internal alignment rather than external expectations, resulted in creating what many critics consider one of the most significant albums of the decade, despite its unconventional release strategy. So if you reflect on your own relationship with withdrawal versus visibility, have you experienced how constant connection often creates shallow expression, while strategic solitude creates unexpected depth? Have you noticed how your most significant contributions often come through periods of deliberate withdrawal rather than constant engagement? What wisdom might become available if you recognize that authentic influence comes through depth of expression rather than frequency of visibility? What makes this approach spiritually significant is how it illuminates the relationship between solitude and impact. Frank's decision to release Blonde independently after leaving Def Jam demonstrates what wisdom traditions call autonomous expression. So creating from internal alignment rather than internal expectation. So even when this approach contradicts conventional wisdom about success. So if you think about your relationship with constant connection, might be limiting your impact. If you think about how your relationship with constant connection might be limiting your impact. Do you find yourself creating for immediate validation rather than authentic expression? Have you noticed how your attachment to constant visibility creates fragmentation that actually restricts your depth? And what might change if you approach your work as expression rather than as expression of internal clarity, I should say, rather than a response to an external expectation. So this pattern connects to ancient wisdom, ancient spiritual understanding about the relationship between solitude and power. From desert fathers who retreated from society to find deeper truth, to Thera's deliberate withdrawal, to Walden Pond wisdom paths have long recognized what modern connection culture often forgets: that authentic power emerges not from constant visibility, but from the depth and clarity that becomes possible only through intentional solitude. Even the psychology of creativity supports this wisdom. We've got research shows that constant connection creates cognitive fragmentation that diminishes creative depth. So when we engage in strategic withdrawal, we participate in what psychologists call incubation phase, the essential period of unconscious processing that precedes genuine innovation. So Frank's approach to visibility and creative expression, it reveals a spiritual truth that might transform your approach to connection. Authentic power emerges not from constant visibility, but from strategic withdrawal, and that depth of expression that becomes possible only through intentional solitude. As spiritual teacher Henry Nouwen notes, solitude is the furnace of transformation. What impact might become possible if you released your attachment to constant connection and embraced strategic withdrawal as pathway to deeper expression? The authenticity perspective, transcending the illusion of constant connection. Embracing intentional solitude creates the space for authentic self-connection that becomes the foundation for genuine relationship with others and the world. So beyond understanding the limitation of constant visibility and the power of strategic withdrawal, Frank Ocean's approach to public engagement demonstrates what spiritual traditions call relational authenticity, which is the way intentional solitude creates the foundation for genuine connection rather than performative engagement. His highly selective approach to interviews, performances, and public statements reveal the spiritual principle that authentic relationship emerges from self-connection rather than constant availability. In his rare public communication, Frank has expressed how we experience memory and nostalgia is so important to me. I'm very much a person that wants to feel, he says. This perspective, this capacity to prioritize depth of feeling over frequency of engagement, that reveals the spiritual understanding that genuine connection requires the internal clarity that comes only through intentional solitude. So if you think about moments in your own life when solitude actually deepened your capacity for authentic connection, perhaps a retreat from social engagement, a period of creative isolation maybe, or intentional digital detox, created a space for self-connection that later enhanced your relationship with others. What clarity emerged in those moments, would you say, of intentional solitude? What authentic expression became possible when you prioritize internal alignment over external validation? What makes this approach spiritually significant, though, is how it aligns with the fundamental understanding that authentic relationship requires self-connection. Frank's selective but profound engagement with his audience demonstrates what wisdom traditions call conscious relationship, which is the capacity to engage from internal clarity rather than external expectation. So consider your own approach to relationship versus visibility. How much of your energy would you say goes towards maintaining constant connection versus cultivating the internal clarity that makes genuine relationship possible? What would you prioritize, or what would your priorities look like if you fully embrace the understanding that authentic connection requires intentional solitude? And what freedom might emerge from this shift towards quality over quantity? And this principle connects to a spiritual understanding about relationship between solitude and authentic relationship. Even from Buddhist emphasis on non-attachment to Christian monastic traditions of contemplative prayer, wisdom paths also have long understood that what our connection-obsessed culture often misses. That authentic relationship emerges from the self-connection that becomes possible only through intentional solitude. And even psychology of relationship supports this wisdom as well. Research shows that social media paradox often creates more loneliness through constant but shallow connection. So when we prioritize depth over frequency, we participate in what psychologists call secure attachment, which is the capacity for authentic relationship that emerges from internal security rather than external validation. So Frank's approach to public engagement reveals a spiritual truth that might transform your relationship with connection. Embracing intentional solitude creates the space for authentic self-connection, which becomes the foundation for genuine relationship with others and the world. Even spiritual teacher Parker Palmer notes, the deeper our faith, the more doubt we must endure. And the deeper our hope, the more prone we are to despair. And the deeper our love, the more pain its loss will bring. And these are a few of the paradoxes we must hold as human beings. So if we refuse to hold them in the hopes of living without doubt, despair, and pain, we also find ourselves living without faith, hope, and love. The integration journey, rhythmic balance in a hyper-connected world. What makes the journey towards intentional solitude particularly challenging is just trying to find the balance between necessary connection and essential withdrawal. The spiritual maturity lies in what traditions call rhythmic living, developing conscious patterns of engagement and retreat rather than being swept along by culture's demand for constant connection. So if you reflect on your own struggle to find this balance, so do you tend towards either extreme, either constant connection that creates fragmentation, or complete withdrawal that creates isolation? How might this imbalance be limiting both your peace of mind, or peace, I should say, and your impact? Think about your current approach to technology and connection. Do you swing between compulsive check-in and exhausted withdrawal? What would a more integrated approach look like? One that honors both your need for meaningful connection and your requirement for intentional solitude. What if neither constant visibility nor complete isolation creates optimal conditions for your expression? What if spiritual maturity involves developing rhythmic patterns of engagement and withdrawal? How might this balance transform both your inner clarity and your outer impact? The freedom that comes from this balanced approach isn't just theoretical, but potentially available in your everyday choices. So just think about those rare moments when you've experienced flow state, complete absorption in meaningful activity without concern for external validation. What distinguishes this engaged solitude from either compulsive connection or fearful isolation? Your journey towards intentional solitude requires neither constant visibility nor complete withdrawal. Rhythmic living, developing conscious patterns of engagement and retreat, creates possibility for both internal clarity and meaningful connection. So just consider an area in your life where you currently struggle with either compulsive connection or fearful isolation. What might develop if you cultivated rhythmic balance, which is alternated periods of engagement connection with essential solitude? What pattern of visibility and withdrawal might create optimal conditions for both your well-being and your authentic expression? Frank Ocean's evolution from industry standard visibility to strategic solitude reveals profound truths about the power of intentional withdrawal, truths that might illuminate your own journey towards more authentic expression and meaningful impact. You see, his path demonstrates 3 essential spiritual principles that could transform your relationship with connection, which is that our attempts to maintain constant visibility often begin as necessary pathways to recognition, but eventually become spiritual limitations. That authentic power emerges not from constant connection, but from strategic withdrawal. And that embracing intentional solitude creates the foundation for genuine relationship with others in the world. So take a moment to reflect on your own relationship with solitude. Where have you been sacrificing depth for breadth? Choosing constant visibility over meaningful impact? And what freedom might become possible if you shifted from perpetual availability to strategic withdrawal? What authentic expression might emerge if you focused on internal clarity rather than external validation? If this exploration resonated with you, please hit, of course, that like and subscribe button and join our community exploring the intersection of spirituality and authentic power. And the most profound insight isn't, though, about celebrity wisdom, but it's about universal truth that applies directly to your own journey. When approached with conscious intention rather than fear-based avoidance, our relationship with solitude becomes pathway to understanding the deeper spiritual freedom available beyond the illusion of perpetual connection. Your path towards intentional solitude, like Frank Ocean's evolution, may require the courage to disappoint others' expectation of constant availability. But in that courageous withdrawal lies the possibility of authentic expression that connection-based validation can never achieve. The spiritual freedom that comes only through cultivating internal clarity rather than responding to external noise. As always, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in the field.